It's so great to see you today. My name is Pastor Timm. I get to be one of the pastors here, and I'm so glad that you're here at this house that we call more Dude Worship. Come on. Dude, I think it's because we throw the Spanish lyrics in here. And Pastor Enrique thinks when we start Iglesia de Mas that he's going to get to be the pastor, but yo soy puede. Yeah. Canten ángeles. I'm ready. Hey, I had a week off last week. It's a real funny story. Our pastor, a year or two ago, he and Rachel took off like 2 weeks, and they cleaned their house from top to bottom. And so this year he came back, he said, I want to give y'all all a gift. I want to give you a week off to clean your houses. And as the staff were like, thanks. But it was so great. It was so great to get in and get some of those areas that like wouldn't have had attention. I'm so grateful to my pastors for the time. I'm back, I'm rested, and I'm excited to continue in this journey that Pastor Trustin started us on to know more about the character of God by knowing more about this. It's by understanding him and his stories and his character that we're going to understand more about him. And it matters what we think about God. It matters. A.W. Tozer said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And it matters. Turn to your neighbor and say, how do you see God? Turn to your other neighbor and say, how do you see God? It's important. Because how can you represent God if you don't know what he's like? And when you don't see God correctly, you will always see yourself incorrectly. This I know. Because who he is to you is who he is through you. And so it's super important that we understand who God is to us and who he is to everyone else. But there can be things blocking our view, like these poles here and these poor people that are like lined up here or lined up there. It's like there's sometimes just something that's blocking our view. And for a lot of us, there's been something that's blocking our view of God. Something we learned, something we heard, something we experienced has created an image in our minds of what God is like, and we are always moving closer towards or further away from that mental image of God. We're always moving closer towards or further away from how we see God in our minds. I think it's important if we're going to talk about who God is that we look at who Jesus says he is. Because Jesus was his son, and he primarily related to God as a father. In fact, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John alone, he relates to God as a father, describes him as a father 189 times. Far more than any other descriptor in the Gospels. In fact, 2 Corinthians 6:18 says, I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters. And if you're a parent in the room, let me hear you real fast. Dude, them school holidays be getting out of control. That like 2 days off a month now. It's ridiculous. And I have a beautiful family. They got a picture to show you my beautiful family. Yeah. Y'all be praying for them kids because I'm pretty sure they ain't saved yet. So like they need Jesus. But like with all these school holidays, I have so much free time with them. And like that last week that I was off, so much time. In fact, my son Judy, he always said, Dad, I'm sick, when he found out I was going to be home all day. And so much time. And can I tell you the one thing I heard the most while I was off with them was, Daddy, watch. Dad, watch. Dad, watch. Daddy, watch. Dad, are you looking? Watch. In fact, I filmed a video of my daughter Sloan, one of those instances. Take a look. Oh, no, she's not done. Woo! She's not done.
Good job. Good job. Woo!
I'm the winner.
It's not even good stuff half the time. But they ask all the time. And I think we're really asking another question. Am I doing it right? Do you love me, Dad? Do you see me? Or maybe more importantly, am I enough? Because I wasn't enough to get my dad to stick around. And it wasn't enough to keep my parents from splitting up. And it wasn't enough to keep my dad sober. Am I enough? I think there's a little boy, a little girl inside all of us that just desperately wants to know, am I enough? And many of us have a hard time seeing God as a father. In fact, right now in this very room, there's hurts, there's hang-ups, there's questions, there's triggers. Even right now, as I'm saying that, some of you are bristling because you're saying, hey, if God is anything like my father, I don't want anything to do with him. And then there's a whole other half of the room who's like, I don't know what you're talking about, Pastor, because my dad was like perfect. And I'm talking to you too. Because no, they weren't. And no matter how good your parents were, there were areas where they failed each one of us. And we all have different kinds of dads. Maybe for some of you, you had an absent father. And maybe it was death, maybe it was divorce, maybe it was distance or just disinterest. But for whatever reason, they were removed from your life. They were absent. For some of you, you had an abusive father. And at an early age, you lowered the ceiling of hope so that you could arrive at safer shores and survive. And now you find it so hard to raise the ceiling for anyone else in your life, and most importantly, for yourself. Maybe you had an authoritarian father. These are the my way or the highway guys. Not our family. That's not how we are. When we're out, this is how we look. This is how we act. Never let them see you bleed, son. For some of you had a passive father. Mom ran the show, and dad was there. He just wasn't ever what you needed him to be. He didn't provide the guardrails you wanted or the discipline you craved. He was just like a supporting character in the movie that was your life. Just passive. Some of you had a performance-based father. And blessings came with fine print. And you got the high five if you scored the goal. You got the attaboy if you scored the grade. But love was often withheld to try to get you to perform and to do right. And our view of God is either a projection or a rejection of our earthly father. Whether you had good parents or you had bad parents, there is a gap. And that gap is called the orphan spirit. That's what I want to talk about today. I define the orphan spirit as the gap between who our dad was and who we wanted him to be. The orphan spirit is the gap between who God is and who we wish he would be. It's the orphan spirit. And so I want to start kind of a series of talks, calling it Daddy Issues, and kind of start off with a couple of ground rules that I'll give you here in a second. But it's important to know that when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about physical orphans, because your parents may still be alive and well today, and you can still have the heart of an orphan, because what I'm talking about is spiritual orphans. In the Bible, the word for orphan, it means fatherless. And moms, this isn't to belittle you or your role in the family. This is just the idea that, especially in those times, if you did not have a father, you were cooked. Because a father in those times, he provided protection. And if you didn't have a father, you grew up with a spirit of fear. He provided your provision. He provided for the family. And if you grew up without a father, you grew up with no inheritance. Your father is the one who was supposed to speak purpose over your life, to tell you this is who you were created to be. And if you grew up without one, you grew up with no identity. Your father is supposed to be your promotion. Say, I'm proud of you. And I see all the time people who grew up without a father who have approval anorexia. They're just starved for it. It's important. And all around we look and we see the signs of growing up in a fatherless generation. 1 out of every 4 kids grows up in a fatherless home. Growing up without a father is directly responsible for 63% of youth suicides, 71% of pregnant teenagers, 90% of all homeless and runaway children, 71% of all high school dropouts, and 85% of all youth sitting in prison. If you grow up without a father in the home, you're 2 times as likely to struggle with hyperactivity, emotional disorders, or have a social impairment. You're 3 times as likely to be struggling in school or have repeated a grade. You're 5 times more likely to be poor. You're 33 times more likely to be seriously abused. That's just defined as requiring medical attention. You're 73 times more likely to be killed. I want to take a minute and speak to the single moms and single dads in the room. Not your kids, because there's an anointing over this house, and there's a protection over this house. And so if that's you, your kids are not a statistic. There's a protection over this house. And what I've learned about it is that we can either fake the gap or we can face the gap. And I know dudes who are Wall Street brokers, grown men who make 7-figure-a-year salaries, who are trying to stick it to some guy they didn't talk to 20 years ago to show them that they in fact can. And they're living their life growing up feeling like a kid in their dad's sports coat. And all they really want is some guy in their life to say, I'm proud of you. Good job. And over the next series of talks, because honestly, I don't know like how it's going to be spaced out, I'm inviting us to face that gap and to look at the orphan spirit, because you can't get past the wounds of a father by repeatedly insisting you're not affected by them. I don't care where he is. I don't care what he's doing. I'm never going to be like him. You cannot. The hurts of a father can only be healed by a father. And so it's important that we talk about it, that we look at it. And so just a couple of things as we start this. I only preach these days on assignment. We just had that ripple effect series here. Dude, we have so many voices in this house, I'm ready to retire. Come on. Like, I ain't got to ever preach again in my life, except when God or Pastor Trustin tells me to. And so I preach because I'm on assignment today. The other thing is that I don't have nearly enough time. This is like, I need like 10 weeks to like walk through this whole thing. And so today is going to feel a little bit like, here's the problem, but no solution. And so just be ready for that. And that God has shown me that this is the primary attack of the enemy on this house in this season. And why? It's because this is a house that's built on sons and daughters, which means it's a house that's built by spiritual fathers and spiritual mothers. And that's what we need you to be here at More Church, is a spiritual father, a spiritual mother. And that's what you're feeling when you walk on this campus, that feeling that feels different here. That's that anointing that's over this house. It's an anointing and a mission that this house is called to, which is why the enemy wants to take it out so badly. And so it's important that we talk about it. I think it's the battle for this season for this house. And so I know it because like here at this house as pastors, people love when we give hugs, but they leave when we give spankings. And as spiritual parents, like we have to do both. And usually it has nothing to do with us, because Jesus may be in our hearts, but grandpa's in our bones. And a lot of you are fighting battles that you didn't start. You inherited them. And I fought this for so long in me that it's like a second language to me, like Google Translate. When I hear things in the church world, I can translate them into the orphan spirit. Like when somebody says, my family never felt welcomed. Translation, it's easier for me to leave than to let others in. I've been the kids pastor, I think, longer than any human here. And I hear, especially we got kids camp, youth camp coming up, and people all the time. Yeah, it's awesome. And people yet every year, parents say, my kid doesn't like to be away from us. Translation, I'm not ready to let go of control. And if you're a parent, I'm not coming at you. I'm just telling you that like no one has worked harder to make sure that More Kids is the place for your kid on a Sunday morning than I have. And nobody has worked harder to make sure that like camp and all of our things are safe, because dude, we have people here that are called to shepherd the sheep, but we also have people here who are called to kill wolves. And so that's my goal here at this church, and that's what my station over our Next Gen ministry. Trust them to us, man. When they say, I'm not sure I'm called to serve there, a lot of times that means I'm not sure I'll be noticed if I serve there. And when they say all they talk about is money, sometimes they mean I can't give or I don't want to, and conviction feels crappy. So, and sometimes if you haven't already felt like I'm coming at you a little bit, or if you feel like I'm coming at you a little bit, it's because I am. And it's important to say that's not me, that's the orphan spirit. And that feeling of like your butthole puckering up and getting a little bit mad as I'm talking right now. It's important that you understand that that is the tool of the enemy to keep you in offense and to keep you from hearing discipline. But I am with you. I am not against you. And I am with you for however long this journey takes. John 14:18 says, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come for you. And my prayer is that these talks would be an impartation from my life. That God would take what has cost me and put it in you without the cost. But today, my assignment is just illumination. And so there's not a lot of solutions. Today is about saying, hey, there it is. That's the orphan spirit. That's what it looks like. And we'll get to solutions later, I promise. But that's not my mission today. Last week, Pastor Trustin talked about how Adam and Eve ruined it for everybody. Their kids, they weren't much better. Spoiler, and there's so much that I could talk about, but today, my assignment is the orphan spirit. You see, because the garden was where the orphan spirit first showed up. Because the devil was the first orphan. And his goal from the very beginning, his strategy has been to make us orphans too and to alienate us from our Father in heaven. Jesus' desire is to make you more like him. The devil's desire is to make you more like him. He's fatherless, he's disinherited, he's lost. And he works to make you more like him. When Adam and Eve disobeyed, they made each of us orphans. And our kids inherit what we introduce. I already said it, but you didn't start some of the battles you're fighting, you inherited them. And if you don't confront them, you'll become them. But this is a house that breaks generational curses. This is a house that says, yeah, it ran in my family until it ran into me. And then I drew a line and I said, thus far will you come and no further, you die with me. And so we're talking about Adam and Eve and their kids today. I'm going to jump right into it because I ain't got time. Genesis 4:1-5. Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Abel became a sheep farmer, but Cain farmed the land. One day, Cain gave part of his harvest to the Lord, and Abel also gave an offering to the Lord. He killed the firstborn lamb from one of his sheep and gave the Lord the best parts of it. The Lord was pleased with Abel and his offering, but not with Cain and his offering. This made Cain so angry, he could not hide his feelings. And see, this is the hard part about it, because orphans and sons can grow up in the same house, under the same address, and grow up with completely different hearts. They can eat at the same table, they can wear the same clothes, they can carry the same responsibilities, and yet the only thing that's different is their heart. And it's really difficult to tell the difference from the outside in, because outwardly they can look like a son, but it's not until they get passed over for something, it's not until they get bumped, it's not until they get slighted or offended that what is inside comes out. And that's the minute you can tell the difference in an orphan and a son. Because reactions speak louder than words. And the orphan spirit creates a hunger in our hearts that demands to be satisfied. It's a father hunger in our lives. Here's what I know is that settling for crumbs doesn't keep you fed. It leaves you starving and angry at anyone who looks full. And Cain, as he gave an offering, thought that he was loved because of what he was doing, when in fact he was loved because of who he was. I highly doubt that it had anything to do with what he was giving, but how he was giving it. And I know, dude, I've heard so many messages about how Cain phoned it in for his offering, how he gave a weak B-level offering, like a bargain bin blessing to God, how even they say it's the fruits of the ground and he picked him up off the ground. And I don't believe that at all. Because remember what Pastor Trustin talked about last week, that God cursed the ground. And so from Cain's perspective, I'm pretty sure he's like, dude, I took the thing that you cursed and I mastered it. I took the thorns and the thistles, and I beat them down, and I brought this out of the ground with my hard work and my brain. And all he did was like a sheep. What do you mean that you favor his offering over mine? I'm the firstborn. I'm the one who should be favored. But I really doubt it had anything to do with this and everything to do with this. And that's the difference between sons and orphans. Because an orphan serves for the father's approval, but a son serves from the father's approval. And what Cain is assuming is that because God has favored Abel's offering, that there's nothing left for him. And that's the hardest part about being an orphan, is because when you win, I lose. And pie for you means less pie for me. Parents, if you have multiple kids, you know that competition is literally just part of the game. You know, it is part of the game. We have a routine at dinner where we tell all the kids, like, tell me your favorite story of the day. And we try to change up the order of who starts every night. But Finn, who's our middle child, like classic middle child stuff, like just talks louder and louder and louder and louder. He loses his voice sometimes because he's trying to talk over everybody. Because competition is just part of it. You know this if you have kids. But an orphan is jealous of others winning. A son is committed to others winning. Orphans can't handle a father's generosity when it's given to people we don't think deserve it. Orphans can't handle a father's generosity when it's given to people we don't think deserve it. And if we don't guard our heart, man, those thorns and thistles, they choke out the blessing that the Father meant for us to have. They take up root and they rob us of what God was trying to get to us. You see, an orphan thinks that being somebody means beating everybody. A son thinks seeing everybody as somebody means everything. And Cain's first reaction is anger. That's like the first language of the orphan spirit. It speaks in anger and it speaks in absolutes. I always, I never. Anger and absolutes. And you start to hear things wrong after a while. I remember when I was younger, my wife and I worked at Chick-fil-A in Waxahachie. And I had this great job. I was a delivery guy. I drove the cow van. And I remember that we were doing this event, this outside event one time at the Motorplex in Ennis, which is like what I imagine hell looks like and what I imagine hell smells like, and probably full of the people I think are probably going to hell. I'm kidding. But it was a bad weekend. And on one of the deliveries, I had 15 gallons of sweet tea in the back of the van. And not in like the gallon jugs or whatever, in like 5-gallon tanks with like a Tupperware lid on them. And I'm driving down 287 and a car swings across the intersection when they shouldn't, and I have to slam on my brakes, and 15 gallons of tea comes whoosh like a tidal wave up under the wheel well. Like I open up the side doors of this Honda van and and it's just spewing out of this van. And I panicked. And so I went about the rest of my deliveries for the day, and I went and parked the van, and this is Saturday. Chick-fil-A's closed on Sunday. So, beep, beep, and then I went home. And Monday, I'm getting ready for my school deliveries. And the operator, Mr. Brown, is coming outside helping me load up the van with all this stuff, and he opens it, and he's like, and he starts feeling around. What? It's all wet. What is, this is tea. There's tea. And he starts to scream, like, there's tea everywhere. And in that moment, the little boy inside me broke. I started to weep. I started to sob. And I went into the restaurant. I sat down at a booth, and I'm just sobbing uncontrollably. Because in that moment, it wasn't Philip Brown who was yelling at me. It was James Horton. And I'm hearing, yeah, of course, you stupid. Like, of course you'd do that. You hear things wrong. You put other people, you put your dad's face on their body, and you hear the words like it's coming from him. And you start to hear feedback as disloyalty. And you start to hear correction as contempt. You see, as orphans, we have a really hard time with discipline because of how we hear it. And here around the staff, we have this term called positive intent. And it's that if somebody cares enough to give me feedback or correction, it's because they love me and want the best for me, not because they hate me or don't think I belong here. And I have to retrain my ears to hear how they're saying it. Because Hebrews 12:6 says, the Lord corrects the people he loves and disciplines those he calls son. The King James says, he whippeth whom he loveth. And as a son, I've got to learn how to be okay with discipline, because an orphan obeys out of duty, but a son obeys out of delight. And so God, like a good father, tries to warn Cain about what's happening. It says in verse 6 and 7, the Lord said to Cain, what's wrong with you? Why do you look so angry? Sin is lying outside your door, ready to attack. It wants to control you, but you must master it. God tries to tell him, hey, I put your parents in charge to have dominion over the animals, and instead they let the animals have dominion over them. And now the same animal is crouching at your door. And are you going to do the same thing that your dad did, or are you going to break a generational curse? And he tries to give him the opportunity to do different. And that's the orphan's greatest fear, is that one day I'll wake up and be just like my dad. I'll wake up and my wife will hate me and she'll leave me. And my kids will one day wait for a call that I'm dead. And all of this beauty that God has given me will turn to ashes in my mouth. It's the greatest fear that an orphan has. And it's why we are so wrapped up in what we have. An orphan's identity is rooted in what they have. A son's identity is rooted in who they are. What they have. I remember my dad used to say, before I had you guys, I had a Lincoln Town Car. A Lincoln Town Car. I didn't know what a Lincoln Town Car was. I was 10. I just knew it was more valuable than me. An orphan will always want more. A son will never know want. Because for an orphan, what we don't have, we desire. We dream about it all the time. We feel like it's being withheld from us. We scheme on how to get it. And what we do have, we don't deserve. So like there's half of us that feels like something's being withheld from us, that God is like a deadbeat dad in heaven. And that's fine if you don't want to be part of my life, but I just wish you'd pay me the child support you owe me. But there's another half of me. I went shopping with Brady and Easton just a couple days ago, and even as I'm swiping my card, I feel like I don't deserve it. I feel like I'd buy this for my kids, I'd buy this for my wife in a heartbeat, but these shoes are too nice. I should probably take them back when I'm done because I don't deserve them. We feel like we don't deserve what we have. And so we try to spend our lives trying to earn it with checklists and with scoreboards and with spreadsheets. Why grace is so hard for us to accept, because we're trying to earn it. Because an orphan lives by the love of the law, but a son lives by the law of love. And so Cain takes his brother and he tricks him, and they walk out into the fields, and Cain murders his brother. It's the first homicide in history. And as you're watching that, you're like, dude, like overreaction much? Like it's just some fruit. But he murders his brother. And I don't know why he did it. Maybe he thought if Abel's out of the way, then God will have no choice but to make me number one again. Because orphans don't play well with others. You see, to make myself look better, I have to make you look worse. And I'm always questioning my seat at the table. I'm always feeling like a kid who's pulled his seat up at a table he doesn't belong to. An orphan fights for a better seat, but sons fight for a bigger table. And Cain runs. He runs away from God, and he does the same thing that his dad did. God comes looking for him, says, where is your brother? And he shifts the blame. What am I, my brother's keeper? Like, am I supposed to be looking out for him? And this is what we do, because when we feel slighted, when we feel guilty, we lose mercy and empathy for others. I can remember this season in my own life where I was a pastor here, and I'd have young adults complaining about this cutie booty that is what he did and what he didn't do and all this. And at the same time, I'm thinking, my mom is dying of cancer. How dare you? Because if you were walking through what I was walking through, if you had the lot in life that I had, it would break you in half. That's not very nice for a pastor. And many times it's easier to become cold and callous. You know that Pirates of the Caribbean movie, that Davy Jones guy who cuts his heart out of his chest and he buries it away from him. It's what we do emotionally. The Bible calls it hardening our hearts so that we don't feel anymore. We say, I will never let anyone else hurt me like that again. And so we start to get proactive with our friendships. I'm going to break up with you before you break up with me. And when you walk out the door, I'm going to be callous about it and say, don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out and pretend like you never mattered, because I'm never going to let you see me bleed. An orphan seeks isolation. A son seeks intimacy. Cain loses his family. He loses his home. He loses everything. Because when we feel like an orphan, we act like an orphan until we're treated like an orphan. So we can say, see, told you. And the walls we put up to protect ourselves become the prison that keeps us caged. Cain goes and he builds a city. He says, you know what, I can't count on the Father anymore, so I'm going to become my own source. I'm going to build walls for my protection. I'm going to plant crops for my provision. I'm going to make myself a leader and puff myself up for my promotion. I don't need him to be the source. I can be my own source. And God's plan was never for us to live in cities. It was to live in a garden. And for him to be the source. But an orphan always has a plan B. An orphan has plans for their insurance. A son has peace in their inheritance. A son knows that my dad's bank account is deep and wide and he's going to cover it if I just wait long enough. I don't need a plan B. And so I want to end the message here with the solution like in range, but not quite spelled out yet. Because I want us to sit in the tension that we're feeling right now as we think about our earthly fathers. I know, trust me, I know that that's a difficult place to be in, but I want to respect the pace of grace in this place today. And I'm believing that over the next couple of months, that God is going to open your eyes to the places in your heart that haven't quite healed right yet. And then he's going to start to open your eyes to say, see, there it is. That's the orphan spirit. And I know that half of you are like, hey, but wait, Pastor, you're just literally going to drop all that and then you're going to deuce out? Yeah, kind of. Because there's no 1, 2, 3, now you're free for this. I can't have Lova come up here and cast it out of you. The only way an orphan stops being an orphan is being adopted. Yeah, it's the only thing that makes them not an orphan anymore. And so it can't be cast out of you. It has to be replaced with the spirit of adoption. We'll talk about it another day. But in order to do that, we have to come back to the source. Because this is what we do. It would be like Sloan. She's my 4-year-old daughter. It'd be like her when she was off with me this last week going, man, I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. And her going down the street, like sneaking out the house and going down the street to Whitney and Aaron, who are our neighbors, and sneaking into their house. And she's like, ooh, I like steak. So she goes to the fridge and finds some steak. And she's like, I don't know. Oh, yeah, a cast iron skillet. You know, that's what it's called. And she gets that out and she sets it on the stove. And somehow she gets the stove on. How many of you know if she finds the steak, she's going to make a mess? And if she somehow gets the stove on, she's going to burn herself. But this is what we do with God, because all she had to do was come and say, Dad, I'm hungry. And I'll walk in there like, what are you doing? What are you doing sneaking into Aaron and Whitney's house? I'm your dad. I'm your source. What are you hungry for? You want eggs? You want waffles? Girl, I'll make them for you. What do you need? I'm your source. I've got you, kid. And her saying, but Dad, I didn't make my bed. Girl, you think I'm not going to feed you because you didn't make your bed? Man, shut up. I'm going to make you some waffles. But we have to come back to the source.